used to spend most of my time alone inside houses that nobody wanted to be in anymore. That was basically my job. For nearly a decade, I worked freelance for insurance companies, driving out to damaged properties after storms, floods, fires, places people were usually trying to forget. And after a while, you start noticing something strange about abandoned homes. They don't actually feel empty. Not really. Some of them feel paused, like life stepped out for a second and never came back. This happened around 5 years ago, late November, somewhere deep in rural Pennsylvania. I got assigned a rush inspection on an old property that had become a headache for the insurance company. The owners kept filing claims, but every report contradicted the last one. First, it was structural damage, then vandalism. Then they started mentioning noises, movement, things shifting inside the walls. The adjuster who called me sounded irritated more than concerned. He basically said, "Just take the photos and send them over. We need documentation." That was it. Simple job. At least, that's what I thought. The drive out there took longer than expected. The roads got narrower the farther I went, and eventually the GPS stopped updating altogether. I remember looking around and realizing I hadn't passed another car in almost 40 minutes. Just frozen fields, dead trees, telephone poles leaning slightly from age, the kind of place where time doesn't disappear. It just slows down. By the time I found the property, the sun was already dropping behind the hills. The house sat at the very end of a dirt road, surrounded by bare woods. 2 stories, faded siding, sagging porch, one upstairs window covered with cardboard from the inside. Nothing dramatic. Honestly, if you've done that kind of work long enough, you stop expecting dramatic. What unsettles you are the smaller things, the details that don't fit. The owners weren't there. They lived in another state and left a key in a lockbox. I unlocked the back door and stepped inside, expecting the usual smell: dust, mold, damp wood. Instead, the house smelled lived in, faintly. Not fresh exactly, but recent, like someone had made coffee there that morning. I remember standing perfectly still in the kitchen listening, because there's a difference between silence and occupied silence. People who spend a lot of time alone understand that immediately. Empty places sound different. This house didn't. I started working before it got fully dark. Kitchen first, dining room, hallway, ceiling stains, warped floorboards, cracked plaster, normal damage. But every room had little signs that kept pulling at my attention. A mug in the sink with a wet ring underneath it. A chair angled slightly away from the table. Condensation on the upstairs bathroom mirror. Tiny things. The kind of details your brain tries to dismiss because acknowledging them opens a door you don't want opened. I checked every room anyway. Closets too. Nothing. No one there. Around 6 o'clock, snow started coming down hard enough that I could hear it hitting the windows. I figured I'd finish quickly and head back before the roads got bad, but when I tried starting my car, nothing. Dead battery. Completely dead. I sat there gripping the steering wheel for maybe a full minute, just staring through the windshield. No signal on my phone. No nearby houses. Just snow falling harder and harder under the headlights. It's funny how fast irritation turns into vulnerability when you realize nobody knows exactly where you are. People think fear arrives all at once, but most of the time it starts quietly. As inconvenience, as isolation. I grabbed my overnight bag from the trunk and went back inside, planning to wait until morning. At first, it honestly didn't feel that serious. I found a lamp that still worked in the living room and sat on the couch eating vending machine peanuts while scrolling through old downloaded podcasts on my phone. I even remember thinking the whole situation would probably become a funny story later. Then around 8:30, I heard footsteps upstairs. Just 1 or 2 at first. Slow, careful, not loud enough to sound aggressive. Somehow that made it worse. Houses make noise constantly, pipes shift, wood settles, but your brain learns the difference between random sound and intentional movement. This sounded intentional. I stopped breathing for a second and listened harder. Silence. Complete silence. I almost convinced myself I imagined it. Then it happened again. 2 slow creaks directly above me. I called out hello without even thinking. My voice sounded wrong in that house. Too sharp, like the walls didn't want it there. No answer came back. So, I grabbed my flashlight and went upstairs. Every room looked exactly the same as before, except for one thing. The bathroom door at the end of the hall was closed now. I was almost certain it had been open earlier. And I know that sounds small, stupid even, but fear doesn't always come from big things. Sometimes it's just noticing reality shift slightly when you know nobody should be there to shift it. I stood staring at that door longer than I want to admit, then finally opened it. Empty bathroom, rust around the sink, cracked mirror, nothing else. I actually laughed out loud from relief until I noticed the mirror. Someone had wiped condensation from the center with their hand. Not completely, just enough to leave streaks across the glass, fresh enough that I could still see the moisture around it. I backed out immediately, and that's when the feeling really started. Not panic, worse, awareness. The sense that I wasn't alone anymore. I locked both doors downstairs even though the locks barely looked functional. Then I sat there pretending to watch videos on my phone while listening to every sound the house made. And once your mind enters that state, every noise starts feeling personal. Around midnight, I heard footsteps outside in the snow, slow crunching near the side of the house. I muted my phone instantly. The footsteps stopped too, then started again a few seconds later. I moved carefully toward the window and looked through the blinds, expecting maybe a deer or some local guy checking the property. Instead, there was an old man standing near the tree line watching the house, completely still. Thin coat, no hat, snow falling around him. I couldn't even tell how long he'd been there before I noticed him. That was the disturbing part. He didn't look surprised to see me. He just slowly raised one hand and pointed toward the upstairs window with the cardboard over it. Then he lowered his arm and walked back into the woods, calmly. No rush at all. I didn't sleep after that. I kept thinking maybe I should try walking to the main road, but the snow was getting worse and the temperature was dropping fast. So I stayed, and that decision still bothers me sometimes, because deep down I think I already knew something was wrong with that house. Around 1 in the morning, I started hearing another sound upstairs. Not footsteps this time, dragging, very soft, like fabric sliding across the floor. I sat there for maybe 20 minutes staring at the ceiling before finally grabbing the flashlight again. Curiosity and fear are closer than people realize. Sometimes they're the exact same instinct wearing different clothes. The hallway upstairs felt colder now. Noticeably colder. The bathroom door was open again. I know for a fact I left it closed earlier. But by then I didn't even care anymore. I just followed the sound toward the bedroom with the boarded window. The room looked almost untouched since the 90s. Faded wallpaper, small dresser, dust covering everything except for one narrow path across the floor leading directly to the closet. My flashlight was shaking slightly by then. I remember being annoyed at myself for that. Like somehow embarrassment still mattered in that moment. The closet door was cracked open an inch or two, and there was this smell coming from inside. Damp fabric, old air. The kind of smell you find in places that haven't seen daylight in years. I opened the door slowly. Inside was a chair facing the wall. That's all. Just a chair. But carved into the paint in front of it were dozens of overlapping words scratched deep into the wall. Don't look at him when he talks. Over and over again. Different sizes, different pressure marks. Like someone had written it across multiple nights, trying harder each time to convince themselves. I remember staring at those words and realizing something that still unsettles me now. Fear changes people slowly, before it breaks them completely. Whatever happened in that house, it didn't happen all at once. Somebody deteriorated there piece by piece, Then I heard breathing behind me, close enough that I felt it before I processed it. I turned around instantly. Nobody there. Empty room. Empty hallway. But the air behind me still felt occupied somehow, like someone had stepped away a second too late. I left that room immediately. I don't even remember going downstairs. I just remember shoving a chair under the front door and sitting there with my flashlight pointed at the staircase until sunrise. Nothing else happened after that. No footsteps, no voices, just silence. And honestly, that silence was worse than noise by that point. Morning finally came around 7. The snow eased up enough for me to get a weak signal outside and call roadside assistance. While waiting, I walked around the yard near where I'd seen the old man standing the night before. There were no footprints except mine. None leading toward the woods, none leaving them. Just smooth, untouched snow. I told myself the wind probably covered everything. It had to be that. But even saying it now, I don't fully believe it. Later that afternoon, I called the property owner and casually asked about the upstairs bedroom. There was a long pause on the phone before she answered. Then she told me her teenage son disappeared from that house sometime in the early 90s, never found. Afterward, her husband became obsessed with the idea that the boy was still there somehow. He claimed he heard him moving through the halls at night, talking through walls, standing outside doors. Eventually, the husband started sleeping inside that closet upstairs because he believed it was the only place the voice couldn't reach him. A few years later, he wandered into the woods during winter and never made it back alive. After that, she abandoned the property completely. I almost asked her for a picture of her husband. I almost told her about the man outside in the snow pointing toward the upstairs window, but something stopped me. Maybe because part of me already knew. Or maybe because, once you attach a face to a memory like that, it stops being a story. It becomes something else, something heavier. And honestly, I'm not sure I wanted that weight to become real. I want to be upfront about something before I start. I'm not entirely sure what I experienced that day was real, and I know how that sounds. I know people say that right before they tell you something completely terrifying, but I mean it differently. I've spent 5 years trying to figure out whether what happened was genuinely disturbing, or whether a quiet building and too much silence can make your brain build something out of nothing. I still don't have an answer, and that's the part that still keeps me up. For almost 7 years, I worked as an independent property inspector for insurance companies. My entire job was driving into places most people had already forgotten existed. Old nursing homes, flooded motels, shut down schools, factories with weeds pushing through the loading docks. After a while, silence stops feeling creepy and starts feeling familiar. You learn to read buildings the way some people read faces. You can tell when a place was once chaotic, or controlled, or just deeply, quietly lonely. And you stop flinching at every strange thing because strange things are just Tuesday. So when I pulled up to that property in southern Missouri on a cold, late November afternoon, I wasn't scared, not even close. The assignment sounded routine. An insurance company needed updated documentation on a property that had been sitting inactive for a few years. The file called it a wellness retreat facility, which sounded a lot nicer than what it actually was. When I got there, it was obvious someone had tried to convert an old summer camp into a private recovery center. Addiction treatment, maybe. Emotional rehabilitation. Something along those lines. But the business had failed. Hard. The property sat deep in the woods at the end of a narrow gravel road, surrounded by leafless trees and dead grass that looked almost silver in the cold. The sun was already starting to drop when I arrived. That flat gray afternoon light that makes everything feel slightly unreal. There was a main lodge, a few small cabins, and a dining hall beside a pond that had started freezing around the edges. And the first thing I noticed, the thing that immediately stuck with me, was that nothing was vandalized. Most abandoned places get destroyed eventually. Broken windows, graffiti, Ceilings caved in. But this place looked preserved, like everyone had just stepped out for a minute and never came back. Chairs stacked neatly in the dining hall, curtains still hanging in the windows. There was even a basketball sitting near one of the cabins, like somebody planned to finish a game after lunch and simply never returned. Places like that always affected me more than complete ruin. Destruction feels final, but something that looks paused, that feels wrong in a quieter way. I punched in the gate code from the file and drove up toward the lodge. The moment I stepped inside, something felt off. Not dangerous, just off. I need you to understand the difference because it matters. The building was warm, not slightly warm, comfortable warm. The thermostat near the front entrance read 72 degrees, and that immediately didn't make sense. Vacant properties almost never stay heated. Insurance companies shut down utilities almost immediately because they hate unnecessary costs. But there was power. Soft lighting in the hallway. And from somewhere upstairs, very faintly, piano music was playing. Slow, quiet piano music. Like someone practicing alone in another room. I actually stood there and listened for a second because it sounded that normal, that calm. I assumed there had to be a caretaker on site that nobody told me about, so I called out. Nothing. No answer at all. The building also smelled clean. Detergent and coffee. Not mildew. Not the flat, dead smell of abandoned spaces. That bothered me more than the music, honestly. Because smells don't lie the way sounds can. I started the inspection anyway. Because after years of this work, you stop reacting dramatically to strange things. You rationalize. That's part of survival, I think. Human beings are constantly translating discomfort into logic because uncertainty is exhausting. So, I walked room to room taking photos and documenting structural issues. Normal routine. Just doing my job. Then I entered the main common room. There were bookshelves covering almost every wall. Hundreds of books, and every single one had been turned backward, pages facing outward, spines hidden against the wall, not one title visible. I stood there staring at that for a long time. It felt intentional in a way I couldn't shake, like someone had deliberately erased their identities, hidden them on purpose. I took a photo because I knew later I'd want proof I hadn't imagined it. I still have that photo. And I still don't have an explanation for it that fully satisfies me. That's when I heard footsteps upstairs. Slow, measured, not loud or aggressive, just deliberate. And the piano music stopped at the exact same moment. Complete silence after that. I called out again and started climbing the stairs. Halfway up, I became suddenly aware of how physically quiet the building actually was. You ever have that moment where silence stops being background noise and starts feeling like pressure against your skin? That's exactly what it felt like standing on those stairs. The second floor was mostly empty rooms, stripped beds, open doors, except for one. At the very end of the hallway, one door was shut, and underneath it, there was light, warm yellow light leaking through the gap at the bottom. Someone was in that room. I knocked once. No answer. Knocked again and introduced myself. Still nothing. At that point, I honestly felt more awkward than scared. I figured maybe someone was squatting there illegally and didn't want to be found. So I apologized through the door and turned the handle. The room was completely empty. No furniture, no lamp, nothing. Bare carpet, bare walls. But the light was still there, faint and yellow. And after a few seconds, I realized it wasn't coming from inside the room at all. It was coming from beneath the floor, from gaps near the baseboards in the far corner. Just enough glow leaking up to slightly illuminate the carpet. I stood there trying to force a logical explanation onto it. Exposed wiring, a utility crawl space, some kind of maintenance access. I was mid-thought when I heard someone cough underneath me. Weak. Human, close. I stepped backward before I even decided to move. I asked if someone was down there. Nothing. I asked if they were hurt. Silence. Then, maybe 5 seconds later, a woman's voice said quietly, "Please don't leave." I can still hear exactly how she sounded. Not panicked, not screaming, just exhausted. Like someone who had already spent a long time hoping someone would finally come. I asked where she was. No answer. I asked again if she was hurt. Then, very softly, she said something else. She said, "He watches the road." And something about the way she said it made my stomach drop instantly. Because it didn't sound emotional. It sounded practiced. Like a warning repeated so many times it had worn smooth. I left that room immediately, pulled out my phone to call 911, and had zero signal. Which in remote areas is completely normal. But suddenly it felt like the most important detail in the world. I went downstairs fast, trying to stay calm, telling myself there was still a logical explanation, still a reasonable way this all made sense. Then I reached the lobby and found the front door closed. The door I had left partially open when I came in. It was closed and locked. I know for a fact I didn't lock it. I got outside, and there was another vehicle parked beside mine, an old green pickup truck. I never heard it arrive. A man sat behind the wheel staring at the lodge, late 50s maybe. Thin, gray beard, baseball cap, completely ordinary looking. That's what made it worse. He wasn't threatening. He didn't even move, just sat there with both hands on the wheel watching the building. I nodded at him as I walked toward my SUV. He didn't nod back. Then he slowly rolled his window down slightly and said, very calmly, "You shouldn't go upstairs in there." I asked him who else was inside the lodge. He looked at me for a few seconds before he answered. Then he said, "Nobody now." That word, now. I asked him directly if he'd heard a woman's voice in there. He shook his head slowly and said something I still think about late at night. He said, "People hear things in empty places because silence makes them need answers." I don't know exactly why that sentence got under my skin the way it did. Maybe because there's something uncomfortably true in it. Human beings are wired to fill silence. We invent meaning constantly. Patterns, voices, presences. Anything to avoid accepting that some places are simply empty and indifferent. But standing there looking at that man, every instinct I had was telling me the same thing. Leave, right now. So I got in my car and drove. He never followed me, never tried to stop me, just watched me pull away through the trees. About 15 minutes out, I got reception and called 911. Deputies met me nearby and drove back with me to the property. When we arrived, the place felt completely different. Cold, dead. The gate had a different lock on it. Power in the lodge was completely off. No heat, no music, nothing. The section of the second floor where I'd heard the voice had partially collapsed years earlier, according to the deputies. There wasn't even proper flooring under that room anymore. One of them clearly thought I was confused or making things up, but the older deputy stayed quiet most of the time. And before I left, he asked me one specific question. He asked exactly what the woman had said. When I told him, he looked away for a second. Then he told me that years earlier, there had been allegations against one of the counselors who worked at that facility. Claims that residents weren't allowed to leave freely. Phones taken, car keys confiscated, emotional control dressed up as treatment. Then there was a fire. 2 confirmed deaths. 1 staff member disappeared afterward and was never found. Officially, they assumed he fled, but there were inconsistencies in the records. Mentions of a possible unidentified female resident that nobody could fully account for. I went home that night and tried to convince myself it wasn't real. Stress, isolation, suggestion, an overworked brain doing what brains do. But the problem with experiences like that is that once doubt enters your memory, it doesn't fully leave. I went through newspaper archives, old reports, online forums, spent months on it, and eventually, about a year later, I drove back out there one final time, in summer. In daylight, the property looked smaller in the sun, sadder, like seeing a nightmare in the morning after you've already survived it. I walked around for maybe 20 minutes before I noticed something near the frozen pond shoreline. A ceramic coffee mug, white, with little yellow flowers painted around the rim. I recognized it immediately because I had seen that exact mug sitting upstairs near the hallway window the first day I walked into that lodge. I remembered it because it looked too personal for an abandoned building, too specific, too kept. I picked it up. The ground around it was wet from recent rain, but the bottom of the mug was completely dry. Maybe that means nothing. Honestly, it probably does mean nothing. I've told myself that 100 times. But even now, years later, there's one thing I can't shake. Not the voice. Not the man in the truck. Not the light beneath the floor, or the books turned backward, or the warmth in a building that should have been cold. It's the tone in her voice when she said, "Please don't leave," because she didn't sound afraid. She sounded like someone who had already accepted that most people would. Back in 2017, I worked the overnight shift at this tiny radio station outside Portland, not the polished corporate kind. I'm talking about one of those old stations barely hanging on, surviving off used car commercials, local roofing ads, and people who couldn't sleep at 3 in the morning. My shift started at midnight and ended just before sunrise. Most nights, it felt like the entire world just disappeared after 2 a.m. The roads outside emptied out. The studio lights hummed softly. Rain tapped against the windows for hours sometimes. And the strange thing about late-night radio is, people become honest when they think nobody important is awake. You hear it in their voices. During the day, people perform versions of themselves, but at night, especially the lonely ones, they stop pretending. That's probably why I stayed at that job longer than I should have. It felt less like broadcasting and more like eavesdropping on people's hidden lives. And that's how I first heard her. She started calling almost every Thursday night. Same calm voice, every time. Quiet, slow, like she never felt the need to rush a sentence. She said her name was Laurel, though I doubt that was real. She never called to request music, never entered contests, never did any of the normal things listeners did. Instead, she asked questions that felt oddly personal for a stranger. Things like whether certain places could hold emotional residue from people who'd suffered there, or whether I believed loneliness could physically change someone over time. The kind of questions that sound ridiculous in daylight, but at 3 in the morning, sitting alone in a dim radio booth while fog presses against the windows, they somehow feel meaningful. At first, I figured she was just eccentric. Every late-night station gets callers like that. But Laurel was different. She listened carefully. Almost too carefully. Sometimes there'd be these long pauses before she answered me, and instead of feeling awkward, the silence felt intentional. Like she was studying what kind of person I was before deciding what to say next. Looking back, I think I was vulnerable in exactly the way people become vulnerable after heartbreak. I'd gotten out of a relationship a few months earlier. I was living alone, sleeping badly. And loneliness has a way of making emotional connections feel deeper than they really are, especially when the connection is just a voice in the dark. Over time, our conversations stretched longer. Sometimes, she stayed on during commercial breaks. Sometimes we talked after my shift ended while I sat alone in the parking lot watching dawn come up. She never flirted directly, but there was this strange intimacy to the way she spoke, like she already knew certain things about me. One night she asked if I'd ever listened to old recordings of people who were gone now. I laughed a little and said, "Probably." And she said something that stuck with me for years afterward. She said, "Most people don't realize how much of the dead still exists in sound." I remember getting chills when she said that. Not because it sounded supernatural. It sounded sad, like she believed it completely. Eventually, she asked if I wanted to meet her in person. She said she sometimes stayed in this small coastal town called Blackwater Cove. Tiny place, quiet. No cell service, no distractions. She said she liked it because it felt disconnected from the rest of the world. Even now, I can admit there were warning signs everywhere. But loneliness has this dangerous ability to disguise recklessness as spontaneity. You convince yourself you're chasing meaning, when really, you just don't want to feel alone anymore. So I drove out there one Friday in November. The weather, the entire trip was miserable. Thick fog, wet pavement, gray skies that made the afternoon feel like early evening. The closer I got to the coast, the emptier everything became. Blackwater Cove itself barely looked real. One gas station, one diner. A few scattered houses facing the ocean. The kind of town that feels abandoned even when people still technically live there. Laurel texted me directions to a cabin farther north, along a narrow road lined with pine trees. I remember sitting in my car after I arrived, staring at the cabin through the windshield, suddenly realizing how insane the whole situation sounded. But before I could second-guess myself any further, the front door opened, and there she was. Pale skin, dark hair tied loosely back, oversized sweater sleeves covering part of her hands. She looked exactly like her voice sounded. Calm, controlled, a little distant. The cabin itself unsettled me almost immediately, though I couldn't explain why. It was clean, too clean. No family photos, no books, no clutter. It didn't feel lived in. It felt staged, like a place designed to imitate comfort without actually containing any real life inside it. Still, the first couple hours went surprisingly well. We talked easily. She made coffee, asked me about callers I remembered from the station, asked if any voices had ever frightened me. Not annoyed me, not creeped me out. Frightened me. That specific word stayed with me. Because fear is intimate. You don't usually admit fear to strangers. At one point, she looked out the window toward the fog and asked, "Do you think people can disappear emotionally before they disappear physically?" And honestly, I still think about that question sometimes, because there are people I knew years ago who technically still exist somewhere, but emotionally, they're already gone. Maybe that's what unsettled me about Laurel. She felt partially absent even while sitting right in front of me. As night fell, the fog outside became so dense you couldn't even see the trees anymore. The windows turned into mirrors, and I started noticing something strange. Laurel kept glancing toward the glass like she expected someone to appear outside. Not nervously, exactly. More like anticipation. Around 9, she suggested we walk down to the shoreline while the tide was low. I didn't really want to go. The cold out there felt brutal, but she insisted the beach looked different at night. So we grabbed flashlights and headed down this narrow, muddy trail through the trees. The ocean was loud enough that conversation barely carried. Just waves, wind, darkness. The beach itself was almost completely black, except for pale foam rolling onto the shore. Driftwood everywhere. Sharp rocks. No lights for miles. Laurel walked ahead most of the time, completely comfortable in the dark. That should have bothered me more than it did. At one point, she stopped near the cliffs and asked, very casually, if I could hear the humming. I said no, and the expression on her face changed instantly. Not fear, confusion. Genuine confusion. Like she expected the sound to be obvious. She stood there listening for maybe 10 seconds before quietly saying, "That's strange." Then, out of nowhere, she said she'd forgotten something back at the cabin and started walking back toward the trail entrance. Fast. I followed at first, but I stopped for maybe 20 seconds to retie my boot near the path, and when I looked up, her flashlight was gone. Completely gone. I assumed she'd just gotten farther ahead. But the trail wasn't complicated. There was nowhere else to go. I called her name once, then louder. Nothing answered except the ocean. And then came the moment that really scared me. The woods had gone silent. Completely silent. No wind in the trees, no insects. Just this heavy dead stillness pressing in from every direction. I pulled out my phone. No signal. Of course. I kept moving up the trail until I reached a fork I genuinely didn't remember passing before. One path led uphill, the other curved deeper into the forest. I stood there trying to remember which direction we'd come from when I heard footsteps behind me. Slow, steady, not hiding. I turned around expecting Laurel. Instead, there was an older man standing between the trees maybe 30 feet away. No flashlight, no expression, just watching me. I tried talking to him, asked if he knew the area. He didn't answer. He only tilted his head slightly, like he was recognizing me. Then another light appeared, farther back in the woods. Another person. I couldn't make out their face, and something deep in my body reacted before my mind caught up. That instinct people talk about. The one that bypasses logic entirely. Run. So I ran. I took the uphill trail as fast as I could, slipping constantly in the mud, and almost immediately, I heard footsteps behind me. More than one set, fast now. What terrified me most was the silence. Nobody yelled. Nobody threatened me. They just followed, calmly. Like they already knew where I'd end up. I lost the trail within seconds and crashed through wet brush in complete darkness. Branches tearing at my jacket, my lungs burning. At one point I fell hard down a slope and landed badly on my shoulder. I remember lying there for a few seconds, unable to breathe properly, listening to footsteps moving somewhere above me in the trees. Then silence again. That horrible silence. I genuinely believed I was going to vanish out there, that people disappear in places like that more easily than we want to believe. Eventually, I saw headlights through the woods and made it back to the road. I ran all the way to the cabin. Laurel's car was still outside, lights still on, inside. And when I burst through the door, she was sitting at the kitchen table drinking tea, calm as ever. Like she'd been there the entire time. I kept asking who those people were, why she'd left me alone down there, why those men were following me. But the strangest thing wasn't what she said. It was what she didn't say. She didn't seem concerned. Not really. She looked at me the way you look at someone who embarrassed themselves at a party. She calmly suggested I'd probably panicked after seeing locals on the trail. Fishermen, maybe. Hikers, but I knew she was lying. Because if someone came back terrified and bleeding from the woods, you'd ask questions. She barely asked any. That's the detail that stayed with me the longest. Fear recognizes fear, and she didn't seem afraid at all. I left maybe 20 minutes later, drove all the way back to Portland through thick fog, checking my mirrors every few seconds because I couldn't shake the feeling that something was behind me. Laurel's number was disconnected by morning, completely dead. A few days later, I pulled archived recordings from the station because I needed proof she existed, and that's when things became harder to explain. During our conversations, there were moments where I clearly remembered her speaking, but on the recordings, there was only static. Long stretches of static while I continued responding normally, like I was hearing words that weren't there. My station manager joked that maybe exhaustion had finally broken my brain. I laughed too, but then he asked me something I still can't answer honestly. He asked if I ever actually saw the phone line indicator light up before Laurel's calls came through. And the truth is, I don't remember seeing it even once. A few weeks later, I drove back to Blackwater Cove during daylight. The road was still there, but the cabin was gone. Completely gone. Just wet grass overlooking the ocean. I asked an older waitress at the diner if there used to be a house near that spot. And the second I described it, her expression changed. She told me there had been a cabin there years earlier. A mudslide destroyed it during a storm. A woman died there, lived alone, worked overnight radio in Portland. I remember sitting in my car afterward for almost an hour, unable to start the engine. And honestly, what bothers me now isn't whether Laurel was real. I stopped trying to solve that part years ago. What bothers me is this. Every once in a while, usually driving alone late at night, I hear this faint humming sound through the car vents. Low, constant, familiar somehow. And for just a few seconds, I always get the exact same feeling. Like there's a road nearby I'm supposed to take. Like something out there still remembers my voice.